My name is Sarah. I am 30 years old, and I will never forget the moment I watched my stepfather collapse in front of me with a glass of whiskey still clutched in his hand. His face turned ashen, his body jerked violently, and the sound of the glass shattering on the floor echoed like thunder in my ears. My mother screamed his name, dropping to her knees beside him, but in that chaos, her eyes found mine, and what I saw in them was not fear, not grief, but blame. That look pierced me deeper than any knife. My legs trembled, and for a second I thought I might faint, because only I knew the truth. That whiskey was never supposed to be in his glass. It was supposed to be in mine. Just hours earlier, I had received the package that started it all. It was left on my doorstep, neatly wrapped in shiny paper with a silver ribbon tied on top. The handwriting on the card stopped me cold. It was from my mother. She had not remembered my birthday in nearly a decade, not since she married him, and yet there it was sitting like a stranger at my door. When I opened the box, I found the whiskey. Not just any whiskey, but the same brand my real father, used to drink before he passed away. For a moment, I was pulled into a memory sitting at his side, smelling the rich oak scent, watching him smile at me after a long day's work. But then the warmth of that memory faded, replaced by the bitter truth. My mother had erased every trace of him when she remarried, packing away his belongings and forbidding his name to be spoken in our home. She had chosen a new life, a new husband, and I had been left behind in the shadows of her choices. So why now? Why whiskey? Why me? I twisted the cap, intending to take in that familiar scent, but the moment the air hit my nose, something snapped inside me. It was wrong. It did not smell like comfort. It smelled sharp, acrid, almost chemical. My stomach churned. I placed the cap back quickly and pushed the bottle away. For hours, I stared at it, feeling its presence gnaw at me like a warning. Later that evening, when my mother and her husband came over, I made a decision I thought was harmless. I smiled politely, lifted the box, and handed it to him as if it were my gift to him. He laughed, uncorked it without hesitation, and poured himself a glass. I remember the golden liquid catching the light, looking so pure and innocent, while inside my chest my heart pounded with dread. Minutes later, he collapsed just as I had feared. My mother's cries filled the room, but all I could hear was the echo of my own thoughts. What if I had taken that first sip? What if it had been me lying on the floor instead of him? My name is Sarah Miller. I am 30 years old, and if there is one thing I have learned, it is that family can be the most dangerous place in the world. People often imagine danger lurking in dark alleys or strange neighborhoods, but for me, it always lived inside the walls of my childhood home. To understand why that bottle of whiskey filled me with dread, you need to know what my life looked like long before that night. I grew up in a small suburban town, quiet streets lined with maple trees, neighbors waving at each other, and the kind of silence that made it seem like nothing bad could ever happen there. My father, Michael Miller, was a mechanic, a man with strong hands and gentle eyes. He would come home smelling of oil and sweat, and when he opened a bottle of whiskey, it was his way of relaxing, of reminding himself he had survived another day. I loved those evenings when he would invite me to sit with him in the garage. Music playing softly from an old radio, and he would tell me stories about the world. He made me believe that no matter how hard life was, love and honesty would keep us safe. That illusion shattered when he died suddenly of a heart attack when I was only 16. My mother, Linda, could not handle the loneliness. Within a year, she remarried, and that is when everything changed. Her new husband, Richard, was nothing like my father. He was a businessman, wealthy, controlling, and with a voice that could silence a room in seconds. He moved into our home like a storm, rearranging everything, throwing out my father's belongings, and demanding obedience. He hated the whiskey bottles that reminded me of Dad, and one by one they disappeared. He called them junk, said they made the house smell cheap. But I knew the truth. He wanted to erase every trace of my father because he could not stand the idea of sharing my mother's heart with a ghost. My mother let him. She followed his commands as if her own voice had been stolen, and in time she began to treat me like I was nothing more than a burden. I became the outsider in my own home. When I graduated high school, I left as quickly as I could, thinking distance would protect me. But even miles away, the shadows of that house followed me. My mother rarely called, never remembered my birthday, and when she did appear, it was usually to criticize or to remind me of how grateful I should be that Richard had provided for us. She spoke of him as if he were a savior, but I only remembered the nights when his shouting shook the walls, when his hand clamped down on my arm so tightly that I could feel the bruise for days, when his eyes burned with a kind of anger that had no reason other than control. That was the man I faced the night of my birthday when I handed him the bottle. Imagine standing in front of someone who spent years breaking you down, someone who took the place of the father you loved and twisted your mother into his accomplice, and imagine giving him the very gift that might carry your own death inside it. I cannot tell you why I did it. Maybe part of me wanted to prove that I was no longer afraid. Maybe part of me thought the universe would finally reveal the truth if I set the bottle free. My mother Linda looked so pleased when I opened that package earlier in the day. It was the first time she had remembered me in years, and for a second I felt like a child again, hopeful that maybe this was her way of reaching back to me. But then the smell of that whiskey hit me, and my hope twisted into fear. I remembered the countless times she had chosen Richard over me, the way she defended him even when he hurt me, the way she turned her back when I begged for her to see me. Suddenly, the gift felt like a trap. I spent hours replaying the years of silence, the holidays she spent with him instead of me, the phone calls that ended with her saying she was too busy to talk. That was the weight I carried into the living room that night. Sarah Miller, 30 years old, daughter of a father who loved me, and a mother who abandoned me standing across from the man who had made our lives a cage. Every detail of that night is burned into my memory. The way Richard smirked as if he owned the air in the room, the way my mother's laugh sounded rehearsed hollow, the way the bottle glistened in the light, tempting and poisonous all at once, and the way my heart raced as I pushed it into his hands, trying to act casual while inside me every nerve screamed. This was not just a family dinner. This was the culmination of years of silence abuse and betrayal wrapped up in one single bottle of whiskey. And though I did not know it yet, it was the beginning of everything unraveling. The night of my birthday was supposed to be quiet. I had convinced myself I would let the evening pass without celebration, that I would not allow the silence of being forgotten to wound me yet again. But when my mother called in the late afternoon and insisted they would come over with dinner, I felt the pressure of obligation. She sounded cheerful, too. Cheerful, the kind of voice she used when she wanted to hide something beneath the surface. I hesitated, but in the end, I agreed, telling myself that refusing would only create more conflict. I spent the next hour cleaning the small apartment I rented, arranging the table, and staring at the box that still sat on my counter. The bottle inside seemed to glow in the dim light, daring me to touch it. I told myself I would not open it again. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped. My mother walked in first, her perfume filling the room, her hair perfectly styled, her smile stretched wide like she was performing. Richard followed behind, tall, imposing, his eyes scanning every corner as if he owned the place. He carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had always gotten his way, and when his gaze landed on me, it was with the same disdain I remembered from my teenage years. I forced a smile, trying to keep the trembling out of my hands. We ate dinner, though the food tasted like dust in my mouth. Conversation was strained. My mother spoke endlessly about Richard's accomplishments, about the trips they had taken, the houses they had looked at buying. She barely asked me a question. I nodded and pretended to listen, but my mind kept drifting back to the whiskey. At last, Richard leaned back in his chair, patted his stomach, and demanded a drink. It was then that I made my decision. I reached for the box and pulled out the bottle, holding it up as if it were a prize. His eyes lit up at the sight, and my mother gasped in surprise, her hands clasped together like she had just witnessed a miracle. "Happy birthday to me," I said dryly. "But I think it belongs to you." I pushed the bottle across the table. Richard laughed that deep, cruel laugh that used to make me feel small, and he uncorked the bottle with a swift twist. The smell hit me instantly, sharp and wrong, and I felt my stomach lurch. He did not notice. He poured the liquid into a glass, golden and smooth, and lifted it high. "To family," he declared, and he drank deeply. I watched the whiskey disappear down his throat, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mother's eyes flicked to me quick and calculating before returning to her husband. At first, nothing happened. He set the glass down, smirking satisfied, but then his face shifted. His smirk faltered, his eyes widened, and his hand flew to his chest. He gasped for breath, choking his body, convulsing. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor filled the room as he collapsed to the ground. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered, whiskey spilling across the tiles like blood. My mother screamed, her voice shrill and panicked, but even in that chaos she turned to me. Her eyes burned with something that froze me to my core. It was not confusion. It was not fear. It was accusation. "Sarah, what did you do?" She shrieked, her voice trembling but sharp. I shook my head, my mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. My mind was spinning. I had not touched that bottle except to hand it to him. She rushed to his side, pressing her hands against his chest, crying his name. "Richard, stay with me, please," she begged. His body twitched violently, then stilled, his breath ragged. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone and dialed for help. My voice cracked as I explained, my heart hammering in my chest. The minutes that followed felt endless. The sound of sirens in the distance seemed to echo through my skull. I looked at my mother, her face streaked with tears, but still her gaze kept flicking toward me, filled with suspicion. The paramedics arrived, rushing into the room, lifting him onto a stretcher, checking his vitals, injecting something into his arm. They carried him out, leaving behind the smell of whiskey and broken glass. I stood frozen, unable to breathe. My mother turned to me, then, her expression unreadable. She stepped closer, her voice low, trembling with anger. "You gave it to him. You knew," she whispered. I shook my head violently, tears streaming down my face. "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "It was for me." She narrowed her eyes, her jaw tight, as if she did not believe me. That moment was when the truth slammed into me. The gift had never been a peace offering. It had never been a gesture of love. It was meant to end me. And in my desperate attempt to protect myself, I had handed it to the man she had chosen over me time and time again. The weight of that realization nearly crushed me. I stumbled to the couch, burying my face in my hands, my body shaking with sobs. The sound of the sirens faded, leaving a silence that pressed in on me like a coffin. My birthday, the day that should have been a celebration of life, had become the day that revealed just how disposable I was to the woman who gave me life. The hours after Richard collapsed blurred into a haze of flashing lights, sterile hospital corridors, and the sharp sting of suspicion that followed me like a shadow. The paramedics had managed to stabilize him before they rushed him to the emergency room, and I rode in the back of the ambulance with my mother gripping his hand and glaring at me as if I were the reason his life was slipping away. Her eyes, cold and accusing, cut through me sharper than any word. When we arrived at the hospital, nurses and doctors swarmed him, calling out numbers, attaching machines, pushing him through swinging doors that closed in my face. My mother did not even look back at me as she followed, leaving me standing alone in the waiting room under the harsh fluorescent lights. My body trembled as I sank into a chair, replaying every second in my mind. The bottle, the smell, the laughter, the collapse. I wanted to believe it was all some cruel coincidence that the whiskey had simply gone bad, but deep inside I knew better. My mother had sent that bottle to me. She had meant for me to drink it. That thought looped through my mind like a broken record. The hours dragged on the clock, ticking louder with every passing minute. At last, a doctor emerged, his expression grave. He explained that Richard had been poisoned, that they had flushed his system, that he was alive, but in critical condition. Poison. The word crashed over me like a wave. My heart pounded, my palms went cold. My mother gasped and clutched her chest, but when her eyes turned to me, they were blazing with rage. "Sarah, what did you do?" she hissed, her voice low but filled with venom. I shook my head desperately. "Nothing. I did nothing. I swear." She stepped closer, her perfume suffocating her face inches from mine. "You gave him that bottle. You handed it to him. You wanted this." I wanted to scream, to tell her the truth, that she had sent it to me, that she had wrapped it in ribbon and signed her name. But the words caught in my throat because I knew she would never admit it. She would twist it. She always twisted everything. Growing up, Richard was the storm that shook our walls, but my mother was the silence that allowed it. She defended him when he screamed at me for leaving dishes in the sink. She ignored the bruises on my arm when his grip left marks. She smiled when neighbors asked about us hiding the truth beneath her perfect facade. And every time I tried to speak, she silenced me with a look, the same look she gave me now in that hospital hallway. My chest ached with the weight of years of betrayal. The police arrived not long after summoned by the hospital once the word poison had been spoken. 2 officers asked to speak with me. Their questions were sharp clinical. Where did the bottle come from? Who gave it to you? Did you open it? Did you drink from it? My mother stood nearby, listening, her lips pressed tight, her arms folded across her chest. I told them the truth. It came from my mother. It was delivered to me as a birthday gift. I gave it to Richard because I did not want it. The officers wrote notes, their expressions unreadable. My mother interrupted, her voice steady, her mask firmly in place. That is not true. I never sent her anything. She is lying. She wanted to hurt him. My heart nearly stopped. I turned to her, my voice breaking. Mom, you did. Your name was on the card. She shook her head slowly, her eyes glistening with false tears. No, Sarah. No card. No gift. I do not know what she is talking about. My blood ran cold. In that moment, I realized just how far she would go to protect herself and Richard, even if it meant painting me as the monster. The officers exchanged a glance, their pens scratching against paper. They said they would collect the bottle run tests, determine what was inside. They told me to stay available for more questions. Then they left, leaving me drowning in a silence heavier than before. My mother leaned in close, her voice like ice. If he dies, Sarah, this is on you. You will never escape it. Her words pierced me, but beneath the pain, a spark of something new flickered. Anger. For years, I had lived in the prison she built, silenced by her choices, erased by her lies. But now, I saw her clearly. She was not just a victim of Richard's control. She was his accomplice, his equal, maybe even his rival. And she had chosen me as the sacrifice to keep her life intact. That night, I went home alone, my apartment suffocatingly quiet. I sat in the dark, staring at the shards of glass still scattered on my kitchen floor, the stains of whiskey seeping into the tiles. My hands shook as I cleaned it up, the smell lingering like a ghost. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's body jerking my mother's accusing glare, the word poison flashing like a neon sign in my brain. I barely slept. When morning came, I dragged myself back to the hospital. Richard was still alive, unconscious, but breathing. My mother sat at his bedside, her hand clutching his, her eyes red from crying. She did not look at me when I entered. I stood in the doorway, feeling invisible, unwanted, and yet unable to leave. Over the next few days, suspicion grew like a weed. Neighbors whispered. Police asked more questions. My mother spread her version of the story, telling anyone who would listen that I had snapped, that I had tried to hurt Richard out of jealousy, out of resentment. And the worst part was people believed her. She was charming, persuasive, the picture of a devoted wife. I was the estranged daughter, the outsider, the one with a history of leaving, of keeping distance. Every word she spoke pushed me further into isolation. But I knew the truth, and I clung to it with every ounce of strength. That bottle had been meant for me, and if I wanted to survive this storm, I would have to find proof. I began to dig, to search for anything that could expose her. Receipts, delivery records, fingerprints, anything. The anger that had flickered inside me grew into a fire. For the first time in my life, I was not just the victim. I was ready to fight back. The days that followed stretched into a nightmare, every hour punctuated by whispers, accusations, and the suffocating tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud about to burst. Richard remained unconscious in the hospital, his body tethered to machines that beeped in steady rhythm, and my mother never left his side. She played the part of the grieving wife with perfect precision. Her hair always neatly brushed, her clothes immaculate. her tears falling at the exact moments needed to elicit sympathy. People visited offering comfort, and she never failed to glance at me with subtle venom, planting seeds of doubt in every mind that looked my way. The police continued their investigation, asking for details about my relationship with my mother, and Richard digging into my past, scrutinizing my every move. Each question felt like a blade carving into my skin because I could see the trap tightening. My mother had painted me as unstable, resentful, dangerous, and with Richard unable to speak for himself, her lies became the narrative. But I refused to sink quietly. One night after leaving the hospital, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the silence and decided I could not wait for justice to come to me. I had to create it. I searched through the trash, through delivery boxes, through every receipt I had saved. Hours turned into days as I pieced together the fragments. And then, buried in a pile of discarded envelopes, I found the torn corner of a shipping label, my mother's handwriting scrawled across it, partially intact, but enough to prove she had ordered the bottle. My heart raced as I clutched it, my hands trembling. It was not enough for the police yet, but it was a weapon, a shard of truth that could pierce her facade. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air as I walked the halls. I stopped outside Richard's room and watched my mother through the glass. She sat beside his bed, her face turned toward him with devotion, but her calculating eyes flicked up to meet mine. For the first time, I did not look away. I stepped into the room, the envelope corner hidden in my pocket, my voice steady though my insides churned. "We need to talk." Her lips tightened her gaze, never leaving Richard. "There is nothing to talk about," she said coolly. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You sent that bottle. It was meant for me. Admit it." She turned her head slowly, her expression calm, almost serene, but her eyes glittered with danger. "Why would I hurt my own daughter?" she asked softly, tilting her head, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "Because I remind you of him," I snapped, my voice rising despite myself. "Because every time you see me, you see Dad, and you cannot stand that I am living proof of the love you lost and replaced with this." Her mask cracked just for a second, the calm slipping as anger flashed across her face. "You do not know what you are talking about," she hissed, her voice sharp now. "You always were dramatic, always the victim. Do you ever stop to think how hard it was for me raising you alone after he died? How much I sacrificed?" My hands shook, fury boiling inside me. "You sacrificed me the moment you let Richard into our lives. You let him erase Dad, you let him hurt me, and now you want to erase me too." Her hand flew out, striking me across the face with a sharp crack that echoed in the sterile room. My cheek burned, tears stung my eyes, but I stood my ground. For the first time, I did not shrink back. The nurse who had been adjusting Richard's IV gasped, her eyes wide as she froze, witnessing the scene. My mother's mask slipped further, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. She looked at the nurse, realizing she was no longer hidden behind closed doors. "Sarah is unstable," she blurted, her voice desperate. "She is trying to hurt me." The nurse shook her head slowly, her expression filled with shock and disapproval. "I do not think so," she whispered. That moment shifted everything. My mother's control wavered and I pressed forward. I pulled the torn envelope from my pocket and slammed it onto the bedside table. Her handwriting stared back at us, undeniable, incriminating. "This is yours," I said, my voice steady now. "You cannot lie your way out of this." The color drained from her face, her eyes flicking between me, the nurse, and the damning piece of paper. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched heavy, suffocating. Then Richard groaned, a low sound that broke the stillness. His eyes fluttered open, dazed, confused, but alive. My mother gasped, her hands flying to his, her voice trembling. "Richard, can you hear me?" His eyes darted around the room, landing on me, then on her, then on the bottle cap that still sat on the counter. His lips parted, his voice raspy. "The whiskey." She gave it. He lifted a trembling finger, pointing not at me, but at her. The room spun. My breath caught. The nurse's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. My mother's face twisted in panic, her hands tightening on his. "No!" she cried, her voice shrill. "No! You are confused. You do not know what you are saying." But the truth was out. Richard had spoken. My heart pounded as the nurse rushed from the room, calling for the police, for the doctors. My mother's facade crumbled, her tears turning into a frantic scramble as she clutched at Richard, begging him to take it back to save her. But he closed his eyes, his strength fading, and repeated the words. "The whiskey. Linda." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. When the officers returned, everything unfolded quickly. The envelope, the witness, Richard's words, all of it stacked against her. She screamed, she fought, she tried to claw at me as they pulled her away, her nails grazing my arm, leaving burning red lines. "You ruined me, Sarah!" she shrieked, her voice raw, her face twisted with fury. I stood frozen, my chest heaving, tears streaming down my cheeks, but inside me something shifted. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift, the chains loosen. She was no longer untouchable. She was exposed. The officers dragged her out, her cries echoing down the hallway, and I stood by Richard's bed, trembling, exhausted but alive. The nurse touched my shoulder gently, her eyes kind. "You did the right thing," she whispered. And in that moment, for the first time, I believed it. The climax of my story was not the poison or the betrayal, but the realization that I was no longer powerless. I had faced the woman who tried to erase me, and I had survived. The weeks after my mother's arrest felt unreal, as if I were walking through a dream where the world had shifted on its axis and nothing looked the same. I attended hearing after hearing, watching her sit in the courtroom with her perfect hair undone, her face pale, without the mask of charm she had always worn like armor. The once impeccable woman who commanded rooms with a single smile now looked small, diminished, her eyes darting nervously as lawyers presented evidence, as witnesses recounted what they had seen, as Richard's testimony, fragile but damning, sealed her fate. The torn envelope, the nurse's account, and Richard's broken words became the pillars of a case that left no room for her manipulations. For so long, I had believed she was untouchable, that she could twist reality to suit her narrative, but in that courtroom, stripped of her illusions, she was just another person facing the consequences of her choices. When the verdict came guilty on charges of attempted murder and conspiracy, I felt a flood of emotions crash through me. Relief, sadness, anger, grief. It was not joy I felt watching her led away in handcuffs, her shoulders slumped, her eyes hollow. It was the weight of years of silence finally breaking, the sound of chains, snapping, the first breath of freedom filling my lungs. Richard, weakened but alive, eventually left the hospital. He avoided me, his shame too heavy, his pride too wounded, but I no longer needed his acknowledgement. He was no longer the storm that controlled my life. He was simply a broken man left in the aftermath of choices he had made with her. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip people who had once believed her lies, now whispering about the truth. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration, but I learned not to care. Their opinions no longer defined me. For the first time in my life, I defined myself. I moved out of the small apartment that still smelled faintly of spilled whiskey and shattered glass. I packed my bags and left the town where every street corner carried a memory of pain. I drove until the roads became unfamiliar, until the weight of the past loosened with each mile. I settled in a new city, a place where no one knew my name, where I could reinvent myself not as a victim, not as a daughter burdened by betrayal, but as a woman who had survived. In the quiet of my new apartment, I unpacked only what mattered. A few books, a framed picture of my father smiling at me when I was 5, and a notebook where I wrote the story of everything that had happened. Writing became my therapy, my way of bleeding the poison from my soul, turning pain into words, scars into strength. At night, I sometimes dreamed of my mother's eyes, the way they burned with fury as they dragged her away. Sometimes I heard her voice whispering accusations in the dark. But when I woke, I reminded myself that she was no longer in control. She was behind bars, paying the price for trying to erase me. The healing was not instant. The wounds of a lifetime do not vanish overnight, but slowly, piece by piece, I began to rebuild. I took classes, found work, surrounded myself with people who knew nothing of my past, and when I told them my story, eventually, I told it not with shame, but with power. Because it was no longer just a story of betrayal. It was a story of survival, of reclaiming my voice. On my next birthday, I sat alone in my new apartment with a small cake I had bought for myself. I lit a single candle, watched the flame flicker, and felt a smile tug at my lips. I whispered a promise to myself: never again would I let someone else write my story. Never again would I hand over my power. The gift my mother had tried to give me was death, but what I had taken from her was freedom. And as I blew out this candle, I felt the future spread out before me, vast and untamed, finally mine to claim. Looking back now, I realize that survival is not just about breathing, not just about making it through the worst nights or the cruelest betrayals. Survival is about finding the courage to reclaim yourself when everything around you has tried to erase you. For years, I let my mother's lies define me, let Richard's cruelty silence me, let the shadows of a toxic family weigh me down. I thought love meant endurance, that loyalty meant sacrificing myself for people who only saw me as disposable. But I learned the truth I carry with me now, is that love without respect is not love at all. Family without protection is not family. Blood does not give someone the right to break you. The hardest part of leaving that world behind was not packing my bags or moving to a new city. It was teaching myself that I deserved more than pain, that my worth was not tied to how well I played the role they assigned me. My mother's downfall was a tragedy, yes, but it was also her choice. She chose control over compassion, deceit over truth, and she paid the price. Watching her taken away in handcuffs could never erase the scars she left, but it gave me something I never thought I would have: validation, that the years of hurt were real, that my voice mattered, that justice could exist even when it arrives late. When I share my story now, I see how people react. Some shake their heads, unable to imagine a mother so cruel. Others nod their eyes heavy with the weight of recognition because they too know what it is like to be betrayed by the very people meant to protect them. To them I say this: you are not alone and you are not powerless. Silence is the soil where abuse grows, but truth is the light that cracks it open. Speaking up is terrifying, but it is the first step to freedom. If I could speak to my younger self, the girl who hid in her room from Richard's rage and longed for her mother's love, I would tell her that she was not weak, that she was not to blame, that she would one day find her strength. I would tell her that survival is not the end goal, thriving is. Today, I still carry scars, but they no longer define me. They remind me of what I overcame. They are proof that even in the darkest chapters there is a way forward. My life is not perfect and healing is not linear, but I live on my own terms now. That is the triumph my mother could never steal from me. On quiet mornings when I sip coffee by the window of my new apartment, I let the sunlight warm my face and I remind myself that freedom can look like this peace-safety choice. On nights when memories creep back and the old fear whispers in my ear, I breathe deep and remember that I am no longer trapped. The locks are gone. The cage is broken, and every day I step further into the life I chose, not the one forced upon me. To anyone who listens, especially those who have lived long enough to know that families can hold both love and cruelty, I say this: do not be afraid to walk away. Do not be afraid to demand better, even from those who share your blood. Survival is only the beginning. The rest of your life is waiting, and it belongs to you. If my story has touched you, if you have felt the weight of betrayal or the sting of being silenced by the very people who should have protected you, I want you to know you are not alone. My journey was painful, messy, and filled with moments when I thought I would never make it out. But here I am telling you that freedom is possible, that healing is real, and that your voice has power. Every scar carries a lesson. Every heartbreak can be a turning point, and every ending can become the beginning of something stronger. I share this not just to close a chapter of my own life, but to open a door for others who may be walking through the shadows right now. If you see yourself in my words, if you have ever faced toxic control, manipulation, or abuse within your family, I encourage you to speak to seek support and to remember that silence is not safety. Your story matters, your truth matters, and your life belongs to you, not to those who tried to break you. If you are watching this and feel the emotions I poured into every part of this journey, I invite you to let me know in the comments below. Share your thoughts, share your own story, or simply let me know that you hear me. And if you want to stand with me as I continue telling stories like this, stories of survival, justice, and the strength of the human spirit, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Together, we can shine a light where darkness once ruled and remind each other that even in the deepest pain, there is always a way forward.